Chair's report that I'm going to list out for you. It doesn't require an agenda change, but it's something, so at least you can anticipate what we're going to talk about. Under Chair's report, we'll get an update on the, if you recall, the Park Lane wetland, lot split consolidation that we had at the last meeting, and the question about wetlands. There was a lot of work that happened, and we'll bring you up to speed on what happened with that. We'll get an ordinance update from Brian. We'll get a road ends update from Brian. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the 2012-2013 Planning Commission budget. And I'll be looking for some feedback on that from you guys based on the information that we're going to present. So those will be under Chair's report. It does not require a change in the agenda. Questions on that? Ken? Okay. Then I would entertain a motion regarding the agenda.
I move to accept the agenda as drafted.
Second.
We have a motion from Jay, support from Brian on the agenda. Call the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Next is the review of the minutes from our last meeting, November 7th, 2011. Were there any comments on those minutes? Brian?
None.
Jay?
None for me.
Ann?
No.
Jim?
No.
Eric?
None.
Entertain a motion, please, regarding the minutes on November 7th.
I move approval of the minutes of November 7th, 2011.
Motion to approve from Ann. Support? Support. Support from Eric. Call the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. As usual, Lori, nice job.
Thank you.
Okay, public comment. This is an opportunity for citizens to speak with the Commission about any item not on the agenda. Anybody got an item not on the agenda? Okay, seeing no hands, we'll move on to the next item, which is a public hearing, which is a request for an increase in floor area for a detached accessory building. The applicants are Michael and Michelle Machinsky, address 9107 Bellevue. The location, a common description, is 9107 Bellevue. The legal description is Supervisor's Ghost Legal Plat number 38, lots 331 and 330. This is actually on the south side of Bellevue, about 500 feet east of the intersection of Bellevue and Meridian. The proposal was to construct an 1,824 square foot accessory building measuring 38 by 48 feet behind the residence at 9107 Bellevue Road. The building will be used to house classic cars. The zoning is R1B, single-family residential. The relevant ordinances here, and there are several. Article 19, general provisions, specifically those in 19.11 called accessory structures and uses. Article 3, single-family residential, is the second ordinance standard, and specifically those standards that apply to R1B zoning districts. And then finally, Article 22, which is special land use. Again, specifically, these are the rules under which we hold public hearings. A little background on this. Ordinance provisions state that an accessory building of 1,200 square feet would be allowed by right on a lot size that exceeds 30,000 square feet. The lot size in question is 30,700 square feet. Since the applicant is proposing an 1,848 square foot building on this property, that exceeds the 1,200, hence the ordinance standards kick in, and it comes in front of the Planning Commission as a public hearing for consideration. The steps in this process are we hold the public hearing in front of the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission makes a decision, but again, specifically as it relates to review of accessory buildings, this does not go to the Township Board. The Planning Commission decision on this is the final decision. Now, at the last meeting back on November 17th, this application was in front of us. There were a number of questions and comments that prompted the Planning Commission to table this application until today. And so the applicant is coming back again to present the new changes that have been made to their proposal. So, on that note, let's hear first from Brian. You want to give us a summary, please, of what's new?
Absolutely. If it's acceptable, Mr. Chair, I did put a few slides together. I'd like to just walk through a quick presentation, if that's
Please.
okay. Thank you. Make sure this is on. All right. Much of what's in the presentation here, you actually just covered as background, except the presentation's gone. Of course it is.
Disappeared on you?
That it did. Bear with me for one moment here,
Sure.
folks. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Let's try this again.
Is this what the yard's going to look like?
This is a rendering of the rolling hills in the meadows of Groseal. Let's try this again. All right.
I think that's a stretch.
Yeah.
It's worth a try. Worth a try. Unbelievable. I promise you, I went through this 4 times before the meeting started, and it worked.
Hey, it always happens that
It
way.
worked each time. Here we go.
Ah, there we go.
My apologies for the delay there, folks. All right, let's
Okay.
start over. Mr. Chair, you've already kind of walked through some of the background and the nature of the request that's before you. I do have a few graphics in here I want you to see. First is an aerial photo similar to what we showed last fall when we went through this. This is actually oriented such that south is up, so this is on the south side of Bellevue, as you noted, but this aerial provided a better perspective. This is the subject site right here. This is the residence. This detached building that's shown in this aerial has since been demolished. This is an older aerial, as you may recall from our last discussion and any site visits that you've conducted. That building is no longer there. You've already walked us through zoning and ordinance standards. One of the things to point out, and this was part of our discussion last time, this is a neighborhood where certainly detached accessory buildings are quite commonplace. There really are a number of them. In fact, I would almost say there probably are more that have some form of detached building than do not have a detached building. However, I think really the gist of what we're here to talk about tonight is going to have to do with the size of said building along with any potential impacts to neighboring properties consistent with your ordinance standards. This next slide is really just a reminder of what the Commission is looking at. 19.11, paragraph E, section 4, identifies the review standards that you are to apply this evening. The first one is rather straightforward. Obviously, you have to have at least 30,000 square feet of lot area to even qualify to present in front of the Commission for this request. As you noted, Mr. Chair, they do exceed that 30,000 square foot threshold. Therefore, we're in position to move forward with the request. The second one has to do with the screening that's provided, whether it's a setback, vegetation, proposed landscaping, etc. The next one is another requirement where you must provide a setback that is at least equal to the height of the building. In this case, the building is 15 feet tall to the midpoint, and each setback, both sides and the rear, are all well in excess of that 15-foot standard. So A and C you can essentially deem being met. B becomes a question that you'll have to address whether you think it's screened well enough. And then D is another point where you'll have to give some consideration this evening, and that is that architecture must be compatible with the principal building, style, detailing, roof pitch, etc. As we've noted, I'm not going to speak too much to the design. I'll let the applicant do that. They have, in terms of what was presented to you last time, the building is still quite similar. It has, the roof pitch has been increased slightly, so it's a little bit steeper roof, which is something we were looking at. and they have also continued the same materials. It's still siding. It's still kind of that natural clay tone color, which is consistent with the residents, as we talked last time. And they've, and obviously I think back to the landscaping, that's the other big change, and that's what I want to get to next. You've already covered this. This is what happened last fall. Planning Commission discussed. We had a public hearing. You tabled for these reasons. Additional information and discussion on the size and compatibility of the structure, whether or not it complied fully with the design standards, and of course wanting to see some additional landscaping and a better screening plan. The last point here is already consistent with how we've approached this process, and that is that part of your motion last fall included a requirement to conduct a second public hearing. So we've proceeded this evening accordingly. We've conducted all of the proper notifications to both property owners as well as posted in the newspaper. It was more, I think it was more than, but at least 15 days in advance is the state requirement. Here's a few views of the materials that the new materials that were submitted by the applicant. The big changes really have to do with a slightly smaller building. The request before you last time was a 2,000 square foot structure, or 40 by 50. The structure before you this evening is down to 1,824 square feet, or a 38 by 48 foot structure. So essentially, they've taken 2 square feet off of, or 2 feet, 2 lineal feet off of each side, and reduced it by 176 square feet total. As a result of that slightly reduced building size, the setbacks have also been slightly increased. If you think about the building got a little bit smaller, essentially stayed in place, but got a little smaller. So therefore those setbacks actually picked up a couple of feet on those side yards. Also by virtue of the reduced size, the roof pitch went up slightly. So I'm doing a lot of hand gestures tonight here. Sorry about that. Hopefully the people on camera can get that. So if the walls come in, and the peak height is still the same, you can tell that the pitch gets a little bit steeper. So hopefully that made sense. I'll have to take some sign language classes and get that down. The other one, and this is probably the most visible change, if you've had time to drive past the site, especially more recently once we found out that this was going to be coming back before you, the applicant has planted quite a bit of new landscaping. In fact, there are 20 new evergreen trees that have been planted along the side lot lines as well as partially across the front. The applicant did submit some additional detail of those plantings. I will tell you, they were not just the minimum. They weren't 4, 5, 6 foot tall evergreens. They are all in the 9 to 10 and 10 to 12 foot range. So they are at least some sizable plantings. Obviously, the decision will be up to you tonight as to whether or not that is sufficient screening per the ordinance, but they at least have made that effort and put forth quite a bit of screening. Again, whether or not it's enough to screen an 1,800 square foot building is what's before you. And then the last screening element was they also added, and you can just see, if you take a look, if you can follow my cursor here, they've added in on the plans, they've shown some foundation plantings along the bottom walls of the building. These would likely just be some shrubs, but it oftentimes is a way to help break up the mass of a building. We will often require that on, say, a commercial project where we'll want to have something that at least helps to screen that lower 2, 3, 4 feet of the building, especially if it's kind of a cement block structure at that foundation level. So those are some of the things, again, that we would try to do, and those are the major changes that are before you. The last element that I want to hit on was I wanted to give the commission some perspective in terms of really what we're looking at here as it relates to some other buildings in the neighborhood. So this table is just an excerpt from the updated memo that I provided you. And I wanted to give you a couple of different measures in terms of not only building size, but how that building size relates to, say, lot coverage, for instance. As you can see, just based on the table, in this particular area of Bellevue, this would be, if approved, would be the biggest detached accessory building out there by almost 400 square feet. The next biggest is just down the street at 9013. That is it's just over 1,400 square feet. I think it's 1,440 is the number we came up with. I will tell you that that structure was built in the late 80s, and that size was dictated by a variance granted by the Zoning Board of Appeals. So just to give you a little historical perspective as to how that one got there. The other measure that I tried to include in this, again, to give you a relation of size but also proportion to the property itself, is the lot coverage ratio. And as you can see, based on lot coverage ratio, at least of these properties that were checked and reviewed, it is certainly not the biggest in terms of, or not the highest really, in terms of lot coverage. It's about half of the max lot coverage that you'll see in this neighborhood. So again, I just wanted to give you another measure, another method of comparison when you're kind of considering this. The last slide I have for you is just a summary of those 5 that we tested again. And these really just are some photos along with the total square footage. I want to make sure I'm clear on that. For instance, the one in the upper left here, this is a 2-story building with a total of approximately 1,100 square feet of floor area. So its ground floor area is about half that. So it's probably a 550, 600 square foot structure at ground level, but also has this full second story. So I want you to keep that in mind. So for the purposes of lot coverage, we only use the ground floor area, not the total square footage. But again, these are some items for you to consider. These are some certainly, I think, bear some relation to the structure that's being presented to you this evening, and all are on Bellevue, all again kind of within the general proximity of our subject site. So as I've noted, there are a number of detached buildings out there. These were, at least visually speaking, these were the 5 largest that we saw doing a drive-by. We did our best to come up with these numbers. I do have to say one thing, and that is these are not exact. The township, unfortunately, these, you can even tell by looking at some of these, other than the one approved by ZBA in the lower right, these are all rather old buildings, and the township records were a little tricky to navigate, trying to find a little bit better information on these. So real quickly, I want to thank Tony from Community Development, because he actually went out and hand measured these for us so that we had a good method of comparison. And I do think that was kind of an above and beyond approach. And he went out there on a snowy, slushy, cold, nasty day. So I don't know if he's watching, but thank you, Tony, for taking that on. But again, it's all for your consideration this evening. I'm happy to take any questions you have, Mr. Chair. I know the applicant is in attendance as well, so any questions that you may have of them, I'm sure they'd be happy to address as well.
Okay, well, before you leave the podium there, does anybody have any specific questions on the materials that Brian has presented?
I have a couple.
Jay, go ahead. Steve? No.
Brian, just a couple of questions I jotted down as we were going through this. You answered one of the questions that I had written down, which is how did we choose the sample? I guess you just looked for the largest houses as you drove by?
Completely unscientific. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. My idea was I wanted to see what we felt were what visually looked like the biggest buildings out there, and then we followed those up with the added detail of how big are they actually, and how do they relate to the principal building, and then how do they relate to the lot in terms of the lot coverage.
Okay. Yeah, I was a little surprised. Like, for example, 8021, showed up in there. When I first looked at this, I assumed, okay, we must be looking at the ones that you see in that overhead picture. Mm-hmm. I thought, boy, I don't remember any being anywhere near that large in that picture, other than the one at 9013. And then I saw that one and I recognized it, and that's pretty far down the street.
Yeah,
right?
it is. It is.
And the blue one there, that's the one that we see in the overhead. That's maybe 3 houses to the east. Is that right?
It is. That one is much closer. Yes, I can even go back if we think we can find it. Is it this guy here?
Yeah, I think so. Okay. So the others that we see in that picture are
They're certainly not contiguous. Again, the idea was I wanted to present, I didn't look at just the immediate adjacent properties because those were much smaller. I wanted to take this as a broader picture to give you a feel again for what the properties with the biggest accessory buildings out there, what do those look like in terms of the actual numbers?
Right. I think that's helpful, but I think it's also helpful to, think of the immediate area.
Sure.
I mean, those, if you could give us an idea, ballpark, some of those that are, a couple of houses north and south, are we talking like 400 square feet? That's probably too small, right?
Well, I mean, for instance, like if we go here, this just looks
Yeah.
like a little shed. This is probably only a couple of 100 square feet.
Right.
Whereas this is probably more in the one that would be, it's to the right on the screen, so it's actually to the west, not the
Right.
east. But, that's probably more in the ballpark of, I would guess more like 400 probably.
Okay. So, I mean, just for context, I guess, as we're looking at this, and I'm not, just to understand, I mean, if that's maybe 400.
Yeah, I tried to even find, I couldn't even get a good record of the detached building that was on the subject site. So this guy right here,
Yeah.
we're guessing that it's probably about, it was, when it was up, maybe it was about 400 square feet.
Okay. And the principal house has a footprint of about 1,000 square feet?
Yeah, just over.
Okay, so we'd be looking at just less than half, or just less than double the
Yep.
size? Okay. You made the comment, and I sound like I'm only picking on one side of the issue here, but you made the comment that it was the biggest accessory building in the area. Is it fair to say that it may be the largest building in the area,
Well, that I don't know.
footprint-wise?
It's quite large. I'd hate to go out on that limb, truthfully,
Okay.
just because I haven't really looked at all of the houses in the area.
Okay. Those are the questions I had, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you, Jay. Any other questions at the moment for Brian?
I have one.
Brian?
I was wondering, by going through the special land use, they're allowed to go over the standard of 1,200 square feet for the accessory building. But is there a theoretical limit to that if they meet all of the other dimensional standards as far as setbacks, percent lot coverage, et cetera?
The limits would be exactly that. I mean, we've got to go back to, at least in part, we've got to keep in mind the standards on the screen, the base review standards. But yeah, obviously, lot coverage would dictate an absolute maximum, although there is a provision in the ordinance whereby they can come before Planning Commission for an increase even in lot coverage. So even within that, if what you're getting at, which I think is what you're getting at, is what is the biggest that they could put on this site, I can't give you an answer to that because it's kind of a moving target. So, but what I can tell you is what they've proposed is well within the lot coverage that would be allowed. The trick here is that because it's over that 1,200, they're in front of you anyway, if that makes sense.
Anything else, Brian?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Brian at the moment? Okay, thank you, Brian.
Thanks.
Let's hear from the applicant, and then we'll go to the public hearing. Mr. and Mrs. Mashinsky. Welcome to the Planning Commission. Would you care to comment, please, on what you've heard from Brian and what you'd like us to know regarding your application?
Well, he pretty much said it all. There's really nothing much to say except that from the last time I was here, I've done everything and then some that I was told to change, whether it was change the pitch, more screening. I downsized it. I mean, there's, really not much to say. I mean, I know I'm here to try and convince you and sell you on this, as you said last time, but, I mean, as my part, I think I've done everything I possibly can, to do this properly and try and please everybody the best I can. And I give a little bit, and I hope in turn I get a little bit back from you as well.
Okay.
So, and that's all I ask. So.
Very good. Well, I'll tell you what, why don't you have a seat there? Well, we're going to open the public hearing, and then after the public hearing, there will likely be some additional questions that need to be addressed, and I'll ask you to come forward again, okay?
Okay, thank you.
All right, so at this point, let's move now to the formal public hearing. Is there anyone who would like to speak on this topic in front of the commission? Okay, let's start over here. Ma'am, please come on up and give us your name and your address and tell us what you'd like us to know.
Okay. My name is Faye Eldridge. I live at 9049 Bellevue, right next to this proposed building, and my husband and I have written a letter I'd like to read.
Please.
Okay. Dear Planning Commission, when we were last here concerning this project, Mr. Brian Border, Township Planner, listed 3 areas in this plan that needed to be modified. One was the size, too big, it would be the largest structure in the neighborhood. And at that time, he said it would be the largest structure in the immediate neighborhood. 2 was the lack of adequate landscaping, and some more trees have been planted at this time. And 3, there was a need for architectural drawings, and this was not done to my knowledge. We object to this building because it is still too big. A reduction of 175 or 176 square feet is not enough. The building is proposed to be 1,825 square feet, over 50% larger than the maximum allowable. This is way too large for a residential neighborhood. We also question what it will be used for. It was stated earlier that it would be for storage of classic cars and personal vehicles. Will building and restoring also take place in this building? If so, will there be steps taken, like insulation and other noise abatement steps to minimize the noise of power tools, especially compressors? Will the homeowner be working solely on his own cars? Does the township have any recourse if a building like this is used for purposes other than stated? We object to the CAD drawings that were submitted to the township. They are inconsistent in size and inaccurate in showing true size, especially in proportion to the house on the property. We don't believe that any of these drawings were done by a professional. There is one drawing that makes the proposed building appear to be the size of a typical 2-car garage. What materials are going to be used on the outside? What would it look like? We are concerned about our property value. We feel that this proposed building will impact our property value in a negative way. A home is a big investment, and with so many houses for sale, a huge building like this one proposed here could turn prospective buyers away. This is not like your neighbor painting his trim a color that you don't like. This cannot be easily undone. This building could be a huge detriment to a buyer looking for a woodsy residential setting that Groseal is known for. We don't think it's fair to the neighbors to allow the building of what would be the largest structure in a neighborhood and call it a garage. Respectfully submitted, Faye and Michael Eldridge. Anything else?
Is that complete what you would like to tell us?
Well, that's pretty much it. We have some questions, and we hope they'll be answered, and if not, perhaps we'll have a chance to ask them later.
Sure, that would be fine.
Thank you.
Okay, in fact, before we move to the next hand, which I saw in the back there, let's see if we get some answers to some of these questions. Mr. and Mrs. Macheski would come back up, please?
No.
And maybe you can clarify some of this for us.
Yes.
Okay. There were several questions that were contained in this letter. Let's kind of run through those that apply to you, and then there's a couple for Brian over here as well.
Okay.
Will the building be actually used for only storage, or will there be restoring activities that also go on?
Strictly for storage. That's absolutely all it's for. I work for a living. I'm an iron worker. I've been an iron worker for 16 years. That's what I do for a living. It's strictly for storage for my hobby cars, and that's it.
Okay. So it's strictly storage?
Yes.
No
There's
major mechanical?
absolutely none of that, nothing like that.
Okay. So the second question dealt with noise or other activities. Is there anything that you can conceive in that building that would be a source of noise or?
Absolutely not. Nothing that would.
Nope.
Never.
That would be
Never.
extremely loud.
Okay. So the answer to that question is no.
No.
Okay? No noise generation. Okay, the next question goes to Brian. This was for you. Does this township have any recourse if the building like this is used for some other purpose?
If the building is used in a manner that's not permitted by your ordinance, you have your typical ordinance enforcement provisions. They would be cited by community development for a violation of the ordinance, and it would proceed from there.
Okay. This question is not specifically directed to you. You know, we're thinking about, okay, who's the owner 20 years from now? All right.
Yeah.
So Brian, if there were something, some restriction we would place on this for use, okay, that would be in the record. And if that use changed and it became a machine shop or whatever, that would be a basis for the township to act.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
otherwise, a machine, garage-type activities are allowed.
Correct. For personal use and personal, what's the word I'm looking for? Personal belongings, that type of a thing. One thing we went through, my review for this evening, I tried to condense down to just a brief memo because you had the much more detailed review last time. But one of the points that we made last fall was just really reiterating what the ordinance does and does not allow. And that does not allow use of an accessory building for a residential dwelling, so you can't convert it to a granny pad, so to speak. It does not allow the installation, it does not allow the installation of residential plumbing, which essentially is kind of tied to the residential purpose, and it cannot be used for a home occupation or a business activity. So the machine shop that's been thrown out a couple of times now, that would be prohibited by your ordinance. Now, if he needed to do some work on his own car and he was washing it or rotating tires, then technically there's really, I don't think there's anything prohibited in doing so for his own purposes. Now, if he starts doing, small engine repair for his friends and it turns into a business, that's clearly prohibited by ordinance.
Okay. Jay, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to understand, because I think maybe we might be asking a different question than you're answering, or maybe I've got a different question than what Mr. Chair was asking. And the question that I heard the applicant answer was they don't intend to do any significant work on their own vehicles in that garage. And then the question that I heard was, well, what if they do? I think there's the question of what if they run a business. I think that's fairly clear. That's against a violation of the ordinance. There is nothing in our ordinances that would prohibit them from doing work on their own vehicles in there. And the question is, well, what if what if they bought a car and were cutting it down and doing significant work on a regular basis, buying cars, fixing them up, selling them, that became a business, so to speak, but it's it's on his own vehicles. That's where we get into maybe a gray area in between, right? And I'd like to hear what, because maybe an option would be, if we were to approve this, put some limitations on the use to, that the noise can't be greater than a certain amount. I don't know how we would design it if we wanted to, but I guess I would ask the question if you think there are options in that area.
Yeah, I think there are, because part of what we're looking at has to do with the potential impact on neighboring properties. So anytime we're dealing with that, it's the commission you can attach conditions to your ultimate decision if you think it would be in keeping with the ordinance standards.
Yeah, and as the chair very accurately pointed out, we may have absolutely zero concern about the current applicants,
right.
But somebody might see a 2,000 square foot garage and think, I can do a ton of work in this house, I'm going to buy it and bring in all their equipment and do a lot of work that could drive the neighbors crazy. So I mean that's the purpose of the question, I think, more than anything else.
Right? They would be the ones that would be getting cited for it, not.
That's right. And I guess what
it originally.
if I could explain maybe what we're exploring, because I think that's exactly, I think you're saying the same thing I am, and that is, there are times when we'll allow a special land use, and the special land use gives us a certain amount of latitude to say, okay, you can do it, but here are some restrictions on the use that we wouldn't normally put onto a property. But because we're allowing, in this example, a much larger unit, but we're going to put restrictions on it so that it doesn't become something that's particularly annoying to the neighbors. So we could, theoretically, I think, put a restriction on there that, I'm not sure exactly what it would be, that there's not excessive use, but how do you define that? I'm asking you if you have any suggestions if we wanted to explore something like that.
Well, it's, obviously, to me, probably the biggest factor would probably be from a noise generation standpoint that at least I can think of. I mean, if you wanted to try to establish some type of, noise restriction on anything emanating from that building, I'm just not exactly sure what it would be and how we would necessarily do that, but you certainly could. I think it's a little trickier to try to come up with a list of what uses we would allow this for and what we would not allow this for, unless you're very specific that, nothing involving, tools or mechanical equipment or something to that effect. I wouldn't be the right person to try to phrase that anyway, because I don't know anything about cars. I don't know anything about tools, so unfortunately, I'm not going to be much help there, but.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that might be. Sure, you understand what I'm kind of driving at?
Yes, I do.
But I can't picture what that restriction would look like if we wanted to do that.
I mean, I guess if you wanted to go so far as to say that, storage purposes only, I mean, that to me says that you can put things in it, you can take things out of it, you really shouldn't be doing much else. Now, that could be overly restrictive as well. That may prohibit them from doing something that may be perfectly lawful and perfectly in compliance with what we're looking for. So that's why I just suggested it's kind of a tricky area to draw a line through what's right and what's not right.
Exactly. Okay.
Yes, Brian?
Mr. Chair, I have a question more so for Mr. Borden. Is there anywhere within our ordinance that we have similar performance measures for industrial buildings? Because essentially that seems like what the fear is, that it would be turned into an industrial shop, which I want to let you know I'm not accusing you of anything of like that nature, but I'm just using that as a reference for performance measures. And if we bring some sort of parity with that, and at least there's some sort of precedent for why you would attach a performance measure like that, because the fear of an industrial property in a residential area. So if there was some sort of standard that said for industrial areas adjacent to residential neighborhoods must comply with these performance standards of X number of decibels for X percent of the day.
Yeah, we do. In our Airport Light Industrial District, we have a whole host of performance standards, section 9.6 of the zoning ordinance. It speaks to noise, which to me, again, is kind of the obvious one. It goes so far as to also look at vibration that could be produced. This is an idea that this would be a large industrial type use. I'm not sure they could get the type of equipment in this building that would cause vibration problems, but I suppose it's always potential. So that would be one option. Obviously now keep in mind those were written and intended for a light industrial district and not necessarily for residential. So those may be appropriate for an industrial setting. They might be a little lenient for a residential setting if we were to strictly try to apply those.
Steve? Thank you. A couple things here. First, thank you to the applicants again for coming before us and being patient, so I appreciate that. Second thing, for Brian, just want to verify that everything that was presented we did complete for section 19.11E4, the points that you went through in your PowerPoint presentation. We're in compliance with all those standards, A, B, C, D.
Well, if we A and C, yes.
Okay.
I think B and D, I think, are more subjective, and I think that's for the commission to decide. A is the relation of the lot size clearly is met. And then I already forgot, COC was the setback standard based on the height of the building. That is clearly met. Those are objective standards. The landscape screening, whether or not that's sufficient, there is no hard, fast rule or requirement on that. And then also in terms of the architectural compatibility, so.
Okay. And then also in terms of the drawings that were submitted, there was a question raised about CAD.
We're going to get to that, if I might. That's question number 4 on the list. All right, so I'll hold your thought if you would. Other points besides the CAD drawing? No? Okay. Then let's move back to you folks, please. There was a question raised about the drawings and the proportions and the relative size of the accessory building versus the principal structure, essentially as it was laid out on the drawing. And the question was asked about where these drawings came from and how they were generated.
They were done off the computer on a CAD, not by me, not by some professional.
He's an engineer.
He's an engineer. A friend of mine is an engineer for Ford Motor Company, and he did the drawings for me. And yes, they are all in proportion to the setbacks, the heights, everything. So, I mean, I have it all on, a disc for the computer, and you pop it up, and it shows you all the feet and inches and everything.
Okay, so the perspectives that were laid out in the drawings
Exactly.
were done
Even
by
the
the
planks
engineer.
on the siding are exact, the windows in proportion, the doors in proportion, every single detail on there is in proportion. It was all done off a CAD to the exact inch. The blocks on the bottom are exact.
Okay. All right. And talk again, please, about the last question that was raised, and that dealt with materials. Materials on the walls, materials on the roof.
Like the actual
Yeah.
structure, what it's made of?
What is it? Okay, okay, yeah.
The siding or the
Yes.
actual framework?
Yeah, the siding, what's the roof made of? What's the siding? Is
It's
it-
just a standard shingled roof, just like our house. The siding's just that hardy board, composite.
Okay, it's wood.
Well, it's like a concrete cement board. I mean, it's a new composite. It's, it's just done in
Okay,
a
I think
horizontal.
I think the primary gist of this is more directed at, okay, for example, is this
It's just standard.
like a steel building that you see advertised on television?
No, it's actual building.
Siding.
Yeah, it's regular hardy board
Our house
siding.
is vertical, but this is going to be horizontal.
Okay, so this is
An actual house siding is what it
Yeah.
is.
Put it on your
that's
house.
what we're getting at.
Yeah, it's residential house siding is what it is. You can buy it at Home Depot.
Okay.
I mean, it's
Residential house siding,
regular shingles, regular
shingles,
soffits. I mean,
regular
yes.
soffits,
Regular windows.
Windows.
Everything is what you would put on a house. That's all
Okay,
it's no industrial materials. There's no steel siding. The framework isn't made out of steel. It's all just 2x6 studded walls. It's just a standard garage. It's built
Okay.
like a garage, not like a barn or some sort of building.
okay?
So,
I think that clarifies that point. Okay, let's ask you to take a seat again, please, and we'll go back to the public hearing and see what other comments or questions that we get. Sir, you had your hand raised. Would you like to come up, please, and tell us who you are and where you live and what you would like us to know?
Good evening. My name is Scott Shelton. I live at T2813 Meridian, Roselle. I'm here on behalf of Michael and Michelle. I've known Michael most of his life. I'm a friend of his parents, his grandfather. Most of their work that's done is out in the country where Michael's grandfather lives. It's not around here, but he's the kind of person, and Michelle, that you want to move to this community, because everything that Michael's done that I've seen is almost to perfection with his cars, everything. And I assure you, if he's not, he won't be wrenching in there. That's just strictly for storage. I understand your concerns, ma'am, but Mike, if he moved next door to me, I'd be happy. Please, the community needs more people like this young man and young lady here. He'll make the building look nice. I know he will. They're good young people. That's all I have.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Okay, any other comments from the audience? Yes, sir. Please come on up and give us your name and your address, and tell us what you'd like us to know.
Okay. My name is Todd Kellerman, and this is my wife, Loretta. We live at 9118 Bellevue, directly across the street from them. So as far as, an impact and the building looking bad, it would be us looking at it most of the time.
They're right from our front window.
We're right across from it. We don't have any issues or problems with this building at all. We think it would be a good addition to the neighborhood. I mean, from the sounds of it, it's going to be a good-looking building. He seems to be a really good neighbor. He takes care of his land and his lot very good. I mean, it's always cut well. It's always maintained nice. And a building like this, like I said, I think it might bring up the property values. It's a compliment to his house. And as far as like noise restrictions and stuff, everybody works out of the garage and does a little bit of, car repairs or whatever. If you listen to like landscapers, they'll bring out 3, 4, 5 mowers sometimes, and that's more of a noise or more noise than I think he would ever generate in this garage. But we don't have any issues. We think it'd be a good addition, and I really highly recommend that you grant him this, the permission to build this building.
Yeah, as long as we've been neighbors, he's been impeccable with his yard work. I mean, he's always right on it, never lets anything overgrow. And the new shrubs and trees are beautiful, and they're going to get large, and they'll cover a lot of it. And we'll see greenery mostly when it's all grown, so it'll be nice.
Yeah,
Very good.
That's all we have.
Thank you for your comments. Additional comments from the audience on this application? Okay, seeing no hands, I'll bring it back to the table, please, and entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
We have a motion from Eric. Is there support?
Support.
Support from Ann. Call the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Public hearing is closed. Let's now move around the table and see what questions or comments or opinions that commissioners might have. Jim, let's start with you.
Yeah. Actually wasn't here in October. So I missed the first round, but I'm up to speed now. We had a case, something like this, back in 2007, 2008. And I don't know if you've already discussed it or not, where a gentleman on East River Road, same deal, wanted to build a 5-car garage.
Yes, as a matter of fact.
And we had a deed restriction on him as well. It wasn't for him, it was for the next generation that would be buying the house.
I recall the case. It was actually a much larger building.
Right.
I actually put some notes together here because I thought that might come up. I got to be honest, I don't recall. It was approved. I don't recall whether the action included any use restrictions or
positive we put one on there.
Anything to that effect.
You recall?
Yeah, I recall, but the big question that we had was whether or not it could be connected to the residential sewer system, and that was what we did not allow that to happen, so it could not be inhabited. But that was the main restriction I recall on that property.
That, I guess I recall, was specifically intended to do work in there, and so there was a lot more discussion about, whether that was going to be obnoxious to the neighbors and that sort of thing.
I thought he was just storing classic cars in there.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Okay. But no, I've reviewed everything. I don't have further questions.
Okay. Ann, your thoughts, please. Questions, comments?
Well, I look at some of the pictures that he's presented to us, and I don't know whether Brian has them or not, but the garage I like the color of the house and garage. It settles in. It's not like white staring at you all the time. And I think the addition of your landscaping makes it exceptionally desirable. If I were a neighbor, I'd appreciate it. And other than that, I was certainly in favor. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Jay?
Yeah, I don't have that much, but I do just I want to say that it may seem like we're overly aggressively asking questions about this, but I hope you understand that we have limitations on things like this, 1,200 feet, and you come in with 2,000 feet, and it's significantly larger, and we have neighbors who are opposed to it, and it happens to be, kind of near their lot line, and so, we have to be very sensitive to these things, and so while we're certainly sensitive to homeowners being able to do the things they want to do in their homes, we're also sensitive to the impact that it has on the other neighbors, and also on the neighborhood as a whole, and on the future values of everybody, including yours. So I hope you don't take these as being that we're picking on you and choosing one neighbor versus another, but we've got to look at the overall impact on the community as a whole. One of the things that I did want to point out, and it was brought up actually, we didn't see Mr. and Mrs. Eldridge's letter until we got here, but I looked at the drawings, and it appeared to me that the dimensions were not proportional, and so it was funny that she mentioned the same thing in reading that letter. I happened to, because I'm that type, counted the dots on the drawing, looking at one in particular that was kind of directly overhead, and kind of grossing up based on the size that we knew of the footprint of the house to the size of what we think the garage would be. I mean, that tells me that the garage would only be less than 1,300 square feet. So there's a pretty significant variance between what I would expect the drawing to look like versus at 2,000 square feet or 1,824 square feet to what it is. And I don't propose that we sit here tonight and count dots. But it does seem to be a pretty significant discrepancy as I, kind of did the math myself. I don't know if you have any comment to that, other than just the fact that you happen to know that you put in the right dimensions?
Well, I know the dimension. I don't know the exact total depth of my house, but I know looking from the road, it was 30 wide, and then looking at the garage would be 38 wide. So you're looking at only 8 feet difference wider when you're looking at the road. So I don't know what you're looking at, or the dots, or
Well, one of the things we were given is that the footprint of your house is 1,032 square feet. And I don't know what, Brian, where that comes, if that comes from our records or.
I thought I measured it, and I thought it was roughly around 15 or something. I thought we measured it, but I mean,
15 to what we see here would make a lot more sense.
You're more welcome to go measure the thing, but I'm just telling you, I know the actual looking from the road, the house is 30 feet wide, and then the garage will set back, and it's only 8 feet wider from the front, looking from the road.
And then also, when they did these pictures for us, we saved them to a flash drive, and so we didn't want to use their colored ink to print them, so I brought them home, and I had to open them myself and change the angles to get the pictures appropriate, so I could have messed something up as well when it was done, not knowing changing an angle would change, a depth or something.
I mean, just for example, the depth, you mentioned the frontage length, and I wouldn't be making a big deal out of it. It wasn't such a large discrepancy. The depth from north to south of the principal home and the proposed garage in the drawings is exactly the same depth, both 23 dots for whatever that's worth in your drawing, and that just doesn't seem to.
The depth of the house and the depth of the garage.
Yeah, so that would tell me that your house is 48 feet, from north to south.
And it may be, like I said, when I measured it, that's probably about right, because it was right around 1,500 square feet, and this building, like I said, is 8 feet wider, and then you're talking a whole 48 feet longer. So, I mean, that's, probably your 300 or whatever square feet difference that you're looking at. So, and in comparison, like this building to some of the neighboring, like you guys have spoke about the blue garage 2 doors down or something, the dimensions on that was 36 by 40. What I'm proposing to have is 38, which is 2 feet deeper than what he's got, and then 8 feet longer the other way. So it sounds ridiculously bigger, but in actuality, it really is, and hopefully those pictures show it, because that is in proportion.
Brian, do you know the source of the 1,032?
The 1,032 is from your assessor's records, so that should be pretty accurate, I would hope. And if it's bigger, I'm sure the assessor would love to know that, so. Well, I'm sorry.
Is he watching? No, and like I said, 1,500 to 1,800, you know, because it is a little bit larger between the two on kind of the straight overhead view. But from 1,000 to, 1,800 square feet, I mean, I would expect that to be, considerably larger, and it's not. And so but I guess what you're saying is you have no idea what this,
Well, maybe,
think it's 1,500.
maybe possibly, whatever is on record could be from not counting, like, there's an enclosed front porch on there. Maybe at the time of when that was measured, that wasn't, but that's part of the foundation of the, the footprint of the house, and it's enclosed, it's closed off now, so I don't know where those measurements came from.
When you were here before, I don't think we're going to, I guess what I'm saying is I'm not sure we're going to resolve that without somebody running over there with a measuring tape right now. Which I'm not proposing. When you were here before, I think you had pictures of what the construction would look like. You didn't happen to bring those, did you? I mean, like you had some.
Like the materials? Well, I didn't bring them. I thought this was as detailed as I could possibly get with the siding and
I mean, we
and
want
all
it
that.
to match our house too. We don't.
Yeah, I mean, we got to look at it.
Crazy eyesores or, so.
Okay. All right, that's my questions.
All righty, thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Steve? Questions, comments, opinions?
I guess I just have a couple thoughts. Again, I want to express gratitude for your patience. I know it's been an arduous process, and appreciate you taking the time and coming back and working with Brian on this. I feel like sometimes we're always stuck in the middle because we have a book, there's one up here, of all these different ordinances and codes and things like that we have to look at, yet we have to try to be respectful about neighbors and opinions of the community and the public. And sometimes it does bring those uncomfortable discussions to light and puts the burden on homeowners to produce more information. And it may be different than a previous case that is stated or a case that comes before us, next month. But in this case here, in my opinion, I think you've definitely addressed the concerns of the neighborhood. I think the impacts of home values are much greater than a building structure in today's economy. So I can only take that for so much consideration. And, I think you've met the needs of what is printed in the gross sealed documents that are public today. So for me, you've answered all my questions, and Brian, you've answered all my questions too. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Brian?
I'll reiterate some of what Steve said over here, that the dimensions seem to be met, and all the standards within the ordinance. Landscaping standards and architectural standards are subjective. One person's opinion of what looks good might not look like another, but to me, it looks fine. The only thing I might suggest is, just for clarification, is somewhere where it says the hardy plank or something of that nature within the site plan. I mean, you can see it within the actual view, so it's not something that I'm concerned specifically with, but maybe just for somebody for extra assurance to see that if there was somebody that was upset about that. And as far as performance standards, I really don't feel that there's a need for any additional performance standards. It's a residential area. Most people do, maybe do some minor work within their garage, and I think that's something that if, some residents do have concern about that in the future with the, a new homeowner or whatever it be, we cross that bridge when it comes. That's what our ordinances are there for. So I really don't see any problems, and, I feel comfortable with the site plan as is.
Thank you. Now let's move down to the other end of the table to Eric.
Sure. At the end of the day, it is a big building, but it's also on a big lot. It also meets the, all the setbacks, and it's definitely not the largest by lot coverage ratio. even though it may be by square footage. At the end of the day, the applicant has, I thought, worked very well with us. He's increased the number of plantings substantially. When we first came here, there were just a bunch of little arborvitaes, 1 to 2 feet tall. Now there are 20 substantial trees, in the 8 to 12 foot tall range. He has shrunk the size of the building, and he has provided, architectural details that make this look more residential. So at the end of the day, I think that the whole process is working here very well, and I don't see any reason why this application should not move forward.
Thank you, Eric. I have several comments and questions. First, Brian, my primary concern on this is neighborhood compatibility. Okay, neighborhood compatibility is not spelled out specifically in the 4-line items that you listed under accessory buildings. However, it is my interpretation that this is a modified special land use public hearing, in which case then compatibility is a primary factor. Am I correct in that
Absolutely.
assumption?
Yep. Yeah, and again, as I kind of mentioned, I should have stated that up front. What I prepared for you this evening was really a condensed version of what we talked about last fall. But my full review letter from last September does outline both those 4 standards as well as the general special land use criteria, which, as you've correctly noted, do involve neighborhood character and compatibility.
Okay, so on that basis, theoretically, it is possible to meet the 4 hard standards that you outlined here today and not meet the special use standard, meaning neighborhood compatibility.
Sure.
Because neighborhood compatibility is a subjective factor. Am I correct on that?
Sure, yes.
Okay. So, as I've looked at this, first, the quality of the application this time is substantially better than what we got the last time. Much better. Okay? This addressed the points that we asked for, as the applicant said. Small size reduction, small change in the peak elevation. The landscaping changed. Okay, these were all things that were asked for in the last go around. As I look at this, we have different opinions from neighbors. We have one neighbor who writes a letter and has 4 or 5 key points and a basic concern about the facilities, that building's compatibility with their property. We have neighbors across the street that say that from their perspective, it's exactly the opposite. So in running into, this sort of a thing where it's not unanimous, my perspective is I put myself there. And I say, okay, I'm now the neighbor. What do I see? What do I think? What would my opinion be? And I kind of go from there. So, because what we've heard from the public is contradictory. So on that point, I'll come back to the ordinances, and I'll just kind of position myself relative to what is in the book. What is it that we judge? Okay, what is this lot? This lot is an R1B lot. A standard R1B lot is the normal lot around Grosse Ile. It's typically 80 feet wide, and it's roughly 160 feet deep. That's a 16,000 square foot lot. If you go around the island, that's what probably 70% of what's on the island actually is. It's normal. And you have the house size which fits that, correspondingly. Okay, now in a standard 16,000 square foot R1B lot, a 900 square foot accessory building would be allowed. Okay, so that's the baseline. Now let's look specifically at this lot. Okay, for me, this lot now is not 16,000 square feet, although it's still in an R1B, it's 30,000 square feet. Okay, or actually slightly over 30,000 square feet. But if it were exactly 30,000 square feet, and above, the applicant would be entitled to another 300 square feet of accessory building, basically 1,200 square feet. Okay? So, R1B lot, 1,200 square feet based on a 30,000 square foot lot. All right? Okay, and if the applicant were asking for that, he wouldn't be here today. He would have already built it or done it or whatever at his entire discretion. So now the request comes in, and because the lot is not 30,000 square feet, it's slightly over, it's 30,700, 700 square feet over, which is basically 25 by 25 square feet, area. And for that small increase, now the request moves from 1,200 square feet up to 1,850 square feet. So basically, with a small change in the property, its area, it's a 50% change in what's being asked for. So now I try to put this in perspective against some history. Okay, we saw first about this building relative to other buildings in the area. Okay, well, the first building in the area is the house. Okay, this, in spite of a few feet, few square feet, it's roughly 1,000 square feet, give or take. Okay, so here is conceptually an R1B type house, okay, which happens to be on a bigger lot, which now has this accessory building, which is roughly 80% bigger than on the footprint of what's in the house. Okay, that's the first thing, which is a disconnect for me. I'll reference the what you were talking about, Jim, the application that came in from East River Road, where we approved a 2,000 square foot building. And I think back to that one. Okay, that was on a lot that was like 40,000 square feet, maybe even longer. It was a deep lot, and the house on it was probably 4,000 square feet. That was a big house, maybe 35, maybe 40. Okay, and it completely covered the front of the lot, making what was behind it from the street virtually not visible. Wasn't through landscaping. It was just simply that the house took the whole frontage. Okay, so now I look and I come back to this application and I say, all right, this house is an R1B house. Okay, it's standard for the island. It's not the full width of the lot, and so consequently now the accessory building is visible from the street. Okay, albeit with some landscaping in between. So that's the first disconnect for me, just this general size perspective. Jay made a comment about the fact that this might be the biggest footprint, on that part of the block. Now, Brian couldn't validate that, but when you think about that, that seems out of context to me. This is an R1B zoning district. Now, if it were R1A and you had a bunch of 4,000 square foot homes around, okay, we wouldn't be making that statement. So that's my first problem with this. We got data from Brian on lot coverage. Lot coverage is important. Okay, and we have standards which dictate the size of buildings relative to lot coverage. And the numbers were low. Okay, and they were some were a little bit higher, some were lower, and this did not stand out one direction or the other. Well, again, if you've got typically an R1B size house, which is what that neighborhood is, and you put it on slightly, somewhat bigger lots, in this case 30,000, okay, you're going to end up with a lower lot coverage. It's just simply the math. So I look at that and say, yeah, that doesn't really help me. I can't process that and say that helps with compatibility. The next thing I have is as I look at this, is the history. Okay, I've been on this commission for 20 years, and I was on ZBA for 11 years. And I think my ZBA term, Ann here replaced me on ZBA probably in 2001 or 2002, somewhere in there. Mm-hmm. Okay, and accessory buildings, came up frequently in ZBA And it was one of the reasons why we wrote the ordinance the way we wrote it, because we were getting so many applications, to ZBA to do this, to give more than what was in the ordinance. And so, there was obviously a clear need in the community to, from an ordinance perspective, make it easier for people to get what they need for their property. Okay, and we did that. We changed the ordinance. Okay, so now I think back of all these applications we've got, and I said, all right, of all of these, both at ZBA and the few that have rolled through here at Planning Commission, where does this building stand? Okay, this building is number 2. Okay, the second largest building, accessory building, that I can remember ever processing on this island. Second largest. Okay, you think about all the accessory buildings are on this island. Now, albeit some of them may have been built, with or without our permission, whatever, don't know, okay? But, I know of one other building, one other accessory building that's bigger than both this and the one that we approved, that was back, it's on an estate up on the north end of the island, and it was back from the 70s that it was put on there. Okay, I can't think of any other buildings that are bigger than this. And so now I look at this and say, all right, here is potentially the third largest accessory building on the entire island of Grosse Ile. And it's sitting in an R1B residential lot, or residential area, okay? And it just simply does not, it doesn't make sense to me. I would expect this kind of a building on the type of lot and the size of lot that we approved whenever that was, last year, okay, on East River. And so, I have this disconnect with this. And yes, the applicant has made a great effort to make it architecturally sound, better looking. He's worked hard to put landscaping in down there. Okay, but fundamentally, it doesn't change what I'm thinking about, the simple compatibility with the neighborhood. Okay, it's too big from my perspective, and I'm wondering, what will be said 5 or 10 or 20 years down the road when people, when none of us, may be here and living here or whatever, and people drive, they say, now how did that building end up there? Okay. And in fact, you say, well, that will never happen. Well, it does happen. Decisions that came out of ZBA, one or two of them which were controversial, came back and people come back and say, how could the ZBA make a decision like that? Well, at the time it seemed okay, and so it was. But I don't want to have another one of those. And so, this is kind of a long-winded dissertation, but, my opinion obviously is different than the rest of this commission. And when I vote no, I want everybody to understand why. It's not because the applicant hasn't made a good-hearted, faithful effort, to do what the commission requires. It simply, from my perspective, doesn't meet the underlying standard of neighborhood compatibility, which is a special land use requirement of this commission that it must meet. So, that's kind of all I have to say. I'm sorry for being so long-winded on that. Okay, if there are no other comments, I would entertain a motion, please, in this application.
Move to approve this application as submitted.
We have a motion from Eric to approve the application as submitted. Is there support?
Support.
Support from Steve? Who was that? Brian. Okay, I'll call. Is any further discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Nay. The vote is 5. Your vote was?
Yes.
Okay, the vote was 5 votes to 2. The application is approved. You can contact the community development for follow-up action for whatever construction timing you want to meet. Okay? Thank you very much. Okay, let's move to the chair's report. We've got, as I said, a number of items that we want to cover. Let's start first with kind of the business item, which is the 2012 budget. Okay, I received a request from Lorinda Beneteau asking for what the Planning Commission wanted to budget for calendar year 2012-2013 for our work. So I got with Lorinda, extracted the relevant pieces of information from her, put them together in a little spreadsheet for everybody to look at, because our goal tonight in looking at this is to provide a target, a budget target for Lorinda to submit to the township for the consultant line zoning ordinance. Okay? I'm going to run through, this will make a little more sense as I run through it. Okay? The first thing I asked for was, I asked Lorinda to give me everything that related to LSL, okay, and the work that they do for the community. The first was, okay, could you slide this over just a little bit, or reduce the size, or anything you can do on this?
If I fit the whole thing, it gets a little small.
Well, push it over to the left then.
Yeah.
You guys, can you see that okay?
Yeah, that'd be all right.
Okay.
Okay. The first line item that they work to, okay, what you'll see here, you'll see the category of the three line items that are relevant. You'll see the spending in 2008, 2009, 2010 calendar years. You'll find for 11 and 12 the budget. You'll find the expenses through December 31st. You'll find the forecast through the end of March, which is the end of the calendar year, and the percentage of the budget that we will expect to have consumed by the end of March. Okay, and then finally, you'll see a blank there for budget, the calendar, and then finally, some of these things, I put little notes in here as to what these line items actually mean and what they are relative to the Planning Commission activity. The first item that here you see, planning consultant. Okay, this is a line item that was budgeted for $15,000 for this last calendar year, and it's projected that it's going to end up at about $9,200, or roughly. The numbers are small; I can't read it. 82%, something like that, of the budget. This is, while it's LSL, it is not work and not expenses that are driven by the Planning Commission. What this is Brian's support for the activity that goes on in community development. Okay, it's they have a question about something in the building in community development. Okay, they don't know how to interpret an ordinance on something that's confusing. They get Brian involved. Brian is down there. He comes and he sits with them. He's there sometimes during several days during the month. Okay, this is what that cost covers. It is not anything to do with the Planning Commission.
It's essentially coverage, as I understand it. It's coverage for us not having a community development coordinator or director.
Exactly, for not having the position of a full-time permanent planning leader. Okay, Brian fills in and manages that for the township for community development, and from what I hear, does an excellent job. So while that's a budget item, it's not our budget item. Okay. The second is consultant-retainer. Okay. This is indirectly us. Okay. This comes in at $500 a month, and it is in support of basic fundamental tasks. In order that they are attending a Planning Commission meeting, attending a ZBA meeting, this is stuff that you don't want to get individually billed for. Okay, there are things that are built in as part of the retainer. We know we're going to do them in a month, okay, and so rather than trying to parse out, individual costs here and there, it's under a contract, okay, and for that $500 a month, or roughly $6,000 a year, Brian provides all of those services, okay. Now, one of those services is attending all the Planning Commission meetings, and we're budgeted for 12 Planning Commission meetings. Okay, well, we obviously don't have Planning Commission meetings 12 times a year. So the result is that because of the way Brian manages his time, okay, we actually are able to use some of those retainer dollars into the next line item, which is consultant zoning ordinance. That is discretionary. That line item is discretionary, and that is strictly us. And that is work that is above and beyond, stuff that's included in the retainer. It's special work. It's things we determine we need for the community that we didn't know about, okay? And for that, it's basically essentially like the example for this is back late last year. You gave us an estimate, a cost estimate as to how to complete the ordinances that we had still outstanding, okay? And when you did that, you did two things. You looked at the meeting schedule and you pulled dollars out of the retainer, okay? And you added to it and supplemented it with dollars that would come from this budgeted line item, zoning ordinance. Correct on that?
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, what we project on this, okay, for that particular line item, $11,000 is what was budgeted. We expect, given where we are and the fact that we're 2 months away from the end of the calendar year, okay, we're not going to get any more than maybe $6,500 out of that $11,000 actually committed to the ordinance work. There's just simply not enough time. So we will come in at around 59% of the budgeted amount. Now, another thing I should have mentioned about the retainer. The retainer is the contract relationship between the township and LSL Planning. We do not influence that, okay? If that's a township board function to sign that contract. Now, if they want a different scope for that work, okay, that would be something that would be special, and they would come back to us perhaps and ask for it. But it's not on the table for discussion for tonight. For 2012, 2013, that number is $6,000. So it comes down to one question, and it goes back to the Planning Commission goal. If you look at Planning Commission zoning ordinance, and you see $6,500, okay, what do we put in that slot for 2012, 2013? Some facts on this, if you look a little bit lower on this, okay, you'll see three line items there. You'll see the 2011, which is the $6,500, and that makes the assumption that there's not going to be any crash work done between now and March 31st. It ain't going to happen. So, we factored back the dollars to $6,500. Now, Brian and I talked about this today, and we said, all right, okay, there are two ways to go on this. Okay, if we simply pick, well, there's a lot of ways to go, but here's two thoughts on how to proceed on this. The first is if we looked at all the ordinances that we have, and we make a judgment on them, A ordinances, A priority. Okay, what would those be? We've got a request from ZBA about something accessory. Okay, we've got a request from the community development about these accessory structures, and that sort of thing. We've got another one that came up that would be a typical A was when we addressed medical marijuana. Okay, came out of the blue. It was an A priority. We took care of it. Okay, so those things are things that other people are driving, or we feel a strong compunction to be able to do something about. Those are A priority items. Brian and I, in talking about it, said that all right, with what we've got that we know about now that's on that long list of things, if you just pull out the A items and you assume there'll be some balance again, just like we did in 2011 with the retainer money moving around, that reducing the budget from $11,000 down to $5,000 would be prudent. Okay? So that was one thought that we had. The second thought that we had was, okay, well, the Planning Commission may have a broader definition of ordinances they want to change than what it is that we actually call A items. Okay? We have a long list. Okay? So on that basis, okay, maybe, a certain amount of so-called B priority items need to be on the list too. And if that were the case, Brian and I again discussed it and said, well, let's bump it up by another $1,500. That would be $6,500, which would be exactly what we would forecast to spend this year. So from a township perspective, we'd be going from $11,000 down to potentially one of these two numbers, depending upon the discretion of the commission, or if you have a different perspective, I'm throwing this out as a model for you guys to think about. Okay, but I think, I'm of the opinion that we have to demonstrate, the same level of financial scrutiny, with what we have to do. There's certain things we have to do, okay? There's no doubt about it. They're going to come up, and we need money to do it, okay? But beyond that, I think we need to have a very sharp pencil as to what we undertake and what we don't, and really want it, and know that we're going to pay for it, and with less dollars. So, I would, at this point, I hope you get the gist of what the idea is here, and what we're discussing here. Okay. So what I'm looking for feedback from you guys, because Lorinda I'd like to get feedback to Lorinda tomorrow. She needs this in order to plan for the board activities that are going to go on for planning the budget here very shortly. And so I said I'd put this together, I'd present it to you guys, and I would get feedback. So I think that's as much background, and if everybody's clear, then I just go around and ask what you think. Jay, what do you want to do?
Well, my initial thought was, I know how important some of these goals are for ordinance changes, and I was naturally inclined to say, $6,500 is money well spent. But having said that, I think it's important that we save the township money not only, conservatively, but also symbolically. And that I think it's a better move. I think all of us have to sacrifice things that are important, and I think the extra work is important. But I think we can certainly get by with a $5,000 budget, get the A's done to the extent the A's are upon us. So I would be for the $5,000 budget for 2012.
Okay. Thank you. Ann, what do you think?
Well, we keep complaining all the time about government not cutting back on expenses. Well, we're government in a sense. And I think the $5,000 would be certainly an effort to cut back and help balance the budget, because our budget is not balanced at this time.
Okay. Thank you. Jim?
Agreed. 5,000 seems fair. You said today we're at, 5,800?
Yeah, and we'll be at 6,500 by the end of the calendar year.
If I recall, at the beginning of the year, we spent a lot of time on the special meetings and whatnot. Right.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, 5,000 seems fair.
Okay. Brian, what do you think?
Just for clarification, so any money that wouldn't be used within the calendar year would be forfeited? I mean, it would go to LSL anyway?
No.
No. So
not under that account line. Okay.
Okay.
Not under that account line, it would not. Okay. If we don't, if there's no special work, there's no payment. The retainer, however, is every month $500.
Yeah. Okay. I understand the retainer. I struggle a little bit because I understand about the symbolic nature of, as well as trying to cut back on. But at the same time, wondering, how important are some of these zoning ordinance changes, and is the money well spent with, if you can streamline development and make things clear for people, then, it's a less burdensome government to begin with. So, coming in here, I'm still, a novice on the commission. I wasn't around when we started forming the various, A changes and the B changes. So, I don't know a lot about that, but, additionally, I was wondering, does this cover any planning work? Because I know there's, members of our community that would like to look at, various options for, possibly changing things within the master plan. We have, complete streets legislation that could be included with that, as well as the recently formed non-motorized, Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission that might be looking into things about the master plan, various ordinances. So I just wanted to know, is this specifically for us, or would it be also for work that LSL might do for other commissions that might relate to planning documents and zoning ordinances?
Brian, would you comment on that, please?
This line item is strictly zoning ordinance work. That's all we're talking about this
So,
evening.
for example, when you did the master plan, you worked with the airport for the master plan, or the rec commission, there was a special budget that those commissions had to cover that work?
Correct.
Okay, so if other people wanted, other commissions or committees want to do stuff, okay, they have to come up with the money out of their budget. This is only us. Okay, as far as the master plan is concerned, we have, the master plan is a major league undertaking, and, I haven't heard any consensus on the commission that we want to tackle that, anytime soon. It's expensive, and it's very timely, and normally you wouldn't even do it until we had all the census information anyway. But in the meantime, we've revalidated it.
It was within the last year or two. State mandates a 5-year review minimum. Obviously, we always encourage you to look at it, more frequently than that, so we know that you're comfortable with it. But you did reaffirm that within the past couple of years, so we're well within our current 5 years.
And the reaffirmation is basically not much had changed.
Correct.
Okay.
You basically took an action that said our plan is still consistent, it's still up to date, this is still the direction we want to proceed in.
Okay. Brian, does that help answer the questions?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, so what's your final thought on that?
I guess I'd be leaning more towards the 5.
More towards the 5? Mm-hmm. Okay. Eric, as the board rep?
Yeah, no, so John, I think this is excellent work. I mean, you recognize that we were, potentially overspending because we didn't recognize what our actual budget was, and I don't think this is the first time this has really ever been addressed by the Planning Commission or probably most other commissions, is what is your actual budget that you're spending, right? Because we do a lot of this ordinance work because it's required to be done. We don't necessarily think about the value or the dollars per ordinance, time spent. So I think this is a great way of actually forcing us to, look at money we're actually spending, whether we, recognize it or not, because, Brian is a paid consultant, does an excellent job, but if we just keep endlessly doing work, we're endlessly paying Brian. So I think it's excellent that you got this pulled together for us and actually have this, in front of us. As far as the dollar amount goes, I think that to pursue the A ordinance changes only, I think is the right way to go. If there's an emergency that pops up, then there's ways of amending the budget to get that funded. But I think to start off by saying, hey, in 2013 we're going to focus on or 2012 rather, we're going to focus on the A ordinances only. I think that's a good way of doing it.
Okay. I did, yeah, Steve. I did. Oh, I'm sorry, Steve. Excuse me. I got all confused.
No, that's okay. Is Eric done, or?
I'm done.
Yeah, sorry about that, Steve.
No worries. My thoughts are it is always very tough to go back once a budget is done to find more money. And I think in this community there's a lot of people talking about different ordinances. You hear it at the board meeting, you hear it at other commission meetings, you hear it just in public, and a little bit of it was presented here tonight. I think a reduction, as we've seen here, from 2010-11 to the 2011-12 forecast to the 12-13 budget, I think going to 6,500, so pursue A and B ordinance changes, for me, is as aggressive as I think we should go, because there's a lot to, I think, work on in this township. And if we put 5,000 down, it will be tough to go back and get more money. So I'd rather us budget 6,500, and if we fall short of that and we don't use it all, great. But to go back and try to get more with the current board is very tough.
Actually, as it should be.
I am for 6,500.
Okay, so we have Steve at 6,500. We kind of have a general consensus among everybody else to go to 5,000. So,
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
I'll change my vote back to...
Okay, so you go to 6,500. Anybody else want to change to 6,500?
I think 40% is pretty aggressive drop. I'll leave it at that. I'd like to see every...
Well, the way I look at this, Steve, if we give ourselves a hard target like this, it'll force us to be really efficient.
Yes.
So when we go after these ordinances that we want to work on, it becomes a challenge for us is how can we do this in such an efficient fashion that we're more cost effective, with Brian's time. Okay? That's a challenge for all of us. So we can turn this lower number into something that drives us to not just do things the same way we've always done them. Let's find a better way, a faster way. Let's try to maybe take on more of the, do things that will in effect allow us to accomplish, Steve, what you want to accomplish, which is get those ordinances, get the ordinances that you feel need to be done, Brian, you too, and yet do them in a fashion which is the most efficient and cost-effective way we possibly can. And there are things we can do. We're a smart bunch up here.
I agree, and if we can do that for $5,000, great, but let's budget $6,500, because we can't go back for more.
All right, well, I think the general consensus is...
And we've all done budgets, but can't go back.
Is 5,000, and so this is what we'll feed back to Lorinda. Brian, could I ask you to shoot an email with the final decision back to Lorinda?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then she can take this and go with it, and... I don't know, Eric, you need any of this for...
This would actually, I think, be very helpful for, for the next board meeting, just to give a quick update on where the budget's at, and even just the activity that we're undertaking. The board last year had identified this as an issue, as saying, hey, let's task all of our departments and make sure that everyone's, hitting their budget numbers, and we're hitting this one head on.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what then, when you forward the information to Lorinda, send her the table too, and copy Eric on that, and Eric will have the things he needs to then talk with the board. Is that okay, Eric?
That'll work.
Will we see a copy of this again?
A copy of this again?
Yeah.
We just get it monthly at our meetings as an update?
Well, I'm not sure I'm not sure how often actually it's updated, when it comes down to it.
We actually, Mr. Chair, just maybe in a more detailed fashion, one of the things that we are trying to do, and I think may have been included this time. If it wasn't, we'll get back to it. But we were going to make an attempt to include the Community Development Planning Commission line items and budget status reports at your meetings. So the goal, and I think, Lori, did they make the packets this time? They did not. Okay. Well, that's something that we had talked about. So you will be seeing these again in the future when you do have meetings, because when we talked about it the last couple months of last year, and when we got into the idea of discussing some of the cost estimates for some new ordinance work, I think it's important for you all to know where you stand, whether it's a line item basis or whether it's a project by project basis. So we'll certainly be keeping you informed. That's our goal anyway, is to make sure that you're informed.
Well, that would certainly give us oversight into what our expenses are.
Okay, well, let's make sure that in the packages that
Yes.
something that comes forward. Okay, let's move on. It's after 9 o'clock. I think I've got maybe 10 minutes more of stuff. Do you want to take a break and come back, or do you want to keep on pushing?
Let's keep
pushing.
on going.
Keep going?
Keep pushing.
Okay, then let's move to the next one. Brian, would you give us an update, please, on the Park Lane lot consolidation and kind of summarize what we went through after the last Planning Commission meeting?
Yeah, as last fall, you had a lot split reconfiguration on Park Lane before you. Ultimately, recommendation that came forward was a conditional approval to the board, provided if certain conditions were met, they could move forward to the board. If they were not, or basically you left me in control of looking at, is this thing really ready, or is this going to be controversial, and should we potentially kick it back to Planning Commission? And that really revolved around the idea of the need for a further wetland study. If you'll recall, at that meeting, we discussed and debated, the potential of wetlands in that area. Where were they exactly? It was sort of inconclusive at that time. There was a general feel from your township wetland map that, there probably are some wetlands in the area, but does that, do they touch or encroach into the new subject parcel? Do they fill the potential building envelope to the point this is going to be an unbuildable lot? Those types of questions were out there. As a result, the petitioner did hire a qualified firm to go out and conduct a wetland survey. They did so. They did find probably even more wetlands than were initially expected. However, for the most part, those wetlands did not encroach or reduce the building envelopes. So really, there were a lot of wetland areas, most of which were within the conservation easement area, but some of which did encroach into the actual parcel itself, and some of which did encroach into even the potential buildable area of the parcel itself. The findings of the report were recently affirmed by MDEQ. They reviewed the materials. They actually went out on site and reviewed the flag placement of the potential wetland boundary, and they confirmed and agreed with the conclusions of the report. And based on those discussions and looking at the maps themselves, we deemed that there was enough information to move forward to the board. We did not feel that it needed to come back to the commission because it was not a position or situation where it was rendering the building envelope obsolete or really not even there. Ultimately, there have been a few snags and delays along the way. Most recently, the applicant requested to be taken off the board agenda because they had some internal concerns. The last I heard on this, those concerns had been addressed, and I believe this may be moving forward again back to the board. Now, that's the most recent that I've heard, and I was not really directly involved in that conversation, but that's the status report, at least in as much information as I have.
And as a result of that, you'll find at your table the wetlands ordinance, or wetlands ordinance map, okay? That you can stick with your other commission information for reference on any future applications. Okay.
Can I just want to make one kind of closing point on that one, Mr. Chair, pending any questions, of course. And that is really, I want to make sure that the commission understands, and as this goes forward, provided it does go forward, and when it does go forward to the board, I've reiterated to the township manager that I want to make sure that it's clear what's going forward, and that the board is looking at the lot split and reconfiguration of those parcels. The board is not looking at it this time, because nothing's been requested. The board is not looking at or allowing or authorizing encroachments into natural feature setback, work activities in the wetlands themselves. Nothing to that effect. If the petitioner ultimately, if this goes through, and they ultimately decide to build a house on those properties, it will go through the normal review procedures and channels. And if there are potential impacts or encroachments, then there's the potential that that petitioner will either be back before you under the natural feature setback, or even potentially under the wetlands ordinance. So those are still out there, and simply approving the lot split does not allow them to do other things beyond the nature of what's been requested, if that makes sense. We're not granting them full reign to do whatever they want. We're simply saying, here are new property boundaries. Now you still are bound by all these other ordinance restrictions and regulations as you move forward and potentially develop the site.
In essence, we only answered the question, is the lot buildable given the wetlands? And the significant wetlands were on that site, did not get up in that construction area. Well, they basically were at the construction envelope.
Right.
Okay, and so the applicant is going to have to do some adjusting to their plans, and may or may not opt to come back in front of the planning commission.
Correct.
As a result.
Yep. That'll be entirely up to them and what they
That's
decide to, or what they design, or if they sell it, what the potential new owner designs. So it would be just like any other residential new home build project. They're going to have to go through the same steps that anybody else would. They've not asked for any waivers or any encroachments at this time. It's strictly the split.
Okay, any questions on that for Brian?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I might. One of the things that we struggled with in that discussion was whether it would be a feasible approach to kind of delegate our authority within a narrow band to Brian, or to kind of cause it to come back to us. And I guess for our future use, when we have that sort of debate again, I guess I just wonder how that worked out.
Let me talk about that. It basically didn't just go to Brian, it went to me. Okay, I got the information. I reviewed it with Brian. We discussed it at length and reached a consensus decision as to how to move forward. It was not pushing this down to the consultant. So,
Okay. That worked.
and it worked.
It's just the lot split, but no effect on the wetlands was included.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions or comments?
Mr. Chair, I have a comment about the wetlands map.
Yes.
I was just surprised at the age of it, that beam, the analysis was done, I believe, 1989, using 1985 aerial photography. It's pretty old, but I believe that there is a resource available through the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments as far as new wetlands delineation. Again, it would be similar in nature, where it's like generalized location, but it might be an update, and you could, layer in some aerial photography and get a little bit better view rather than just this, white map over here from 1985.
Well, newer information is always better. I guess I would have to question how much different it would likely be. 20 years is a long time. Okay, good, for sure.
Do you know what the
Are you aware of what Brian is talking about?
We have access to some of the state maps, but we can certainly, I'll have our mapping guys take a look through SEMCOG. They have just a ton of information there. So maybe even Brian, maybe we'll follow up with a quick chat if you can narrow the focus a little bit for me, and we can go from there.
Yeah,
if there's already maps delineating it that are more modern, then and we can just pick up on those, that'd be great. I mean, no reason not to.
Well, it's again, this maybe
got to be small.
Goes a step beyond the conversation, but there are a number of resources out there with all the technology available, all the information available today that you as commissioners can certainly take advantage of as well, whether it's via the state website or the SEMCOG website.
Maybe Brian, the two Brians could get together and talk about this. The only purpose for this wetlands map is to be a very high-level general indication. Okay, and it's supposed to say, hey, look, you may need a wetland survey based on this map. Okay, go put the flags in the ground. Okay, that is essentially how it's supposed to be used. And you go out there and you find things that there's more wetlands. You go to other times and there might be no wetlands. I mean, it could go either way. But if there's better information, you think it would be useful, share that source with Brian.
Sure. It's free data, so,
Well, free is good. See, having just talked about the budget.
Do you know what the date of this map is?
He said it's 1989.
Pardon me?
1989. Okay, let's move on. Ordinance updates and road ends. Brian, quickly move us through that.
Yep. I'll start with the road ends update. I'll go out of order here. Just a quick sort of refresher from where we were last fall. If you recall, you sent me off with a handful of questions, which I then took through the township manager to the township attorney. We had been working through a number of items between myself and the township attorney over the course of the past probably the last 2 months, end of the year. And as you may or may not be aware, the township recently appointed a new attorney. So my new task is to work with the township manager and get the new township attorney up to speed in terms of where we were, what work the commission and the subcommittee had done, and then refocus back towards, if you remember, we narrowed it down to really 3 or 4 pretty key questions before we took that next step forward. And that's where I want to get the new attorney, is to get him up to speed and get you answers to those questions so that you as the subcommittee and also as the full commission can make some decisions and potentially recommendations so that we can keep this moving forward. But it has hit a bit of a delay because I've kind of had this gap, in terms of getting information and working with one person and now having to switch gears on that a little bit.
Do you think we can try and move that before our next meeting? Maybe if we're assuming we meet sometime in late March or something?
Yeah, I think I can make that work.
Tom Lasordi is probably up to his eyeballs trying to catch up with the ongoing work, and but hopefully he'll have a little time for you.
We will certainly we will discuss it. I'm sure he won't mind having that added to his list. So he may even potentially be watching at home this evening. So he can expect a call or an email in the next few days.
Well, he'll be a popular guy. You can
absolutely.
I have a quick question on that.
Yes, sir.
At the last board meeting, there was discussion about East River and Stout. Didn't know if there was any updates from Eric or Brian on that road end and the communication with the county.
Brian, you don't know?
I have nothing. I honestly haven't been aware of
the situation of the project.
Yeah, I don't know the exact details of it, but in my just brief discussion with Dale, that there will be an action item on an upcoming agenda regarding that road end, which is exactly the status that we had left it in. The Planning Commission, gave the resolution to the Township Board saying that, I don't remember the exact details, but pretty much any road end that is coming forward must be basically dealt with at a public meeting. So that's where this one's at. So I think we can expect that on a future agenda. I don't know if it's this next week or I think it's going to be the meeting after that, but I can't answer that question. But look for it in a future meeting.
Well, I think this is the exact point I've raised before, that we went down this endeavor of road ends. Now this is 2 road ends that have come up that the county's looking to change their partnership with the township on. And, again, it questions the work that we're doing with road ends. Is it necessary right now or not? Because the county seems to be moving much faster than the township. And if we keep looking at what are these options are going to be less of a discussion because the county have already divested them all, or whatever the term is they're going to use, to everybody. But thank you for the update.
Well, the good news there, though, is, Brian, is that there's a safeguard in place where that, if the Wayne County can't divest it before the township has to act on it in an open meeting.
Yes, ma'am. You had a question or comment. Please come up to the front and give us your name and your address, please, and communicate what it is you'd like us to know.
I'm sorry it's late, and I won't keep you long at all. My name's Nancy Strong. I live at 9485 Waterman. I live at a road end, and I would like to give you these, Lori, the Supreme Court made a decision that you cannot put any boat docks, no lounging, no loitering at the open ends. Nothing. That's a Supreme Court decision that was made December 29th, 2010. So I'll show you.
Yes, Ms. Fromm, we are aware of that decision. In fact, Mr. Borden has got it on his list of activities to discuss with the township attorney.
Okay, well, as you know, I worked very hard to stop the boat. A few of us people worked hard against the boat launch that they wanted to put by my house. Now, this is a glitch, and I know this from the county. Number one, when you have a county road to access an open end, it becomes a public boat launch. So somebody from Riverview, Trenton, Flat Rock, they can come down and they can launch their boat because they say, my tax dollars pay for that road. And I lived at my house for 40 years. When I bought my house, there was no homes. Now there's 4 homes. My street is 12 feet wide. You have to have restrooms. You have to have parking. You have to go to the DNR. You have to put a seawall in, and by the time you're done with the project, the boat launch would have cost $80,000 to $100,000. So this is what happened when I bought my house many years ago. People come, they knock at your door, they say, lady, my little boy has to go to the bathroom. Can I use your bathroom? Lady, do you have a can opener so I can open my pop bottle for my child? And then you tell them no, you tell them to leave. In the morning, you wake up and you find fecal matter in your yard. These people don't care. They take their boats, they put them on trailers, and they try to push their boats to get to the canal. Now, Ann remembers Chick Lafayette. I was so lucky. The police chief lived by my house. He would come over and chase the people out of the area. They would get their boats stuck in the mud, and they'd have to be towed out. So, I'm going to leave it at that, but that's what I'm going to tell you.
Well, we appreciate that input, and in fact, when this moves forward, we have quite many of what you talked about are exactly the sort of questions that we had. Okay, we don't have answers to. Okay, and so that's the sort of thing which is going to the township attorney. What is the public act? What can you do? What can't you do from a legal point of view? Not the least of which is centered around that Michigan Supreme Court 2010 decision.
Well, Wayne County states anything you do, any type of a boat launch, you have to go to the Board of Health, and you have to have restroom facilities. You have to. and then it has to be approved by the Board of the Health. You have to put up a bond. I'm telling you, I spent 4 months working on this boat launch, finding the laws,
Okay,
counting
well, that
people at
that
the
specific
county.
boat launch is off the table.
Yeah,
Okay,
but-
we're not proposing any boat launch. We're not,
No,
we are
Miss-
at the moment, Mrs. Strom, we are not proposing anything.
Okay, I'm going to tell
Okay.
you this. Mr. Krantz, at the rec
okay,
meeting,
Mrs.
proposed
Strom,
the boat launch
please.
on the thoroughfare
Okay, you're
canal
you're
again.
speaking to the Planning Commission, you're not speaking to the board. If you want to speak to Mr. Krantz, go to the Township Board and speak to Mr. Krantz, okay? The Planning Commission has no proposal on the table for road ends, okay? What we have are a series of questions that we have no answers to.
All right,
okay?
I just
Those
want to be
answers
sure,
are-
because
those-
I was told to be reassured, and look what happened last time, so
I
I just
have-
want to be safe here. That's all I'm asking.
All right. I suggest that you direct your public comment to the Township Board, okay? You know, if there's anything that's going on right now for road ends specifically, that's where it's going to be. It isn't going to be here. We don't
Okay.
have enough information to even consider anything, okay?
Okay.
We're only at the evaluation stage, and even if the Planning Commission decided to make some kind of a recommendation to Township Board, it's going to be the Township Board that does any implementation. It's not
Okay,
us.
that's what I want, some
Okay.
reassurance here. So, okay, thank you very
So-
much.
Okay, you're welcome. All right, Brian, let's continue with the ordinance update,
Yep,
please.
absolutely. Last point here, and I will be very brief on this one. You recall again, end of last year, we started to have some discussions on the next round of ordinance amendments, and really where we are with that is I've been doing some prep work with staff, very limited at this point. We really haven't put much time into it, but we're getting to the point where I think we are probably ready, and my goal is after the meeting tonight, I'd like to try to get the subcommittee together and kick around some dates to set up a meeting, potentially, hopefully between now and the next Planning Commission meeting, so that we'll have a better status report at that time. But we have a list that we've taken from the last round, most of which we talked about last time, and really as part of my last proposal to you and cost estimate, we talked about really trying to complete that list. There have been a few new things that have probably been added in that time since that we'll work through, but really the focus should be for the subcommittee to take a look at everything on that list and make sure that's the direction we want to proceed, and/or pick and choose which ones we want to hit and not hit, and we'll move forward from there.
In essence, because we're moving past the calendar year, okay, the estimate that we had really isn't valid anymore, okay? It is in total dollars, but not in terms of meeting the budgeting requirements for both 2012 and 2011.
Right.
Okay, so the bottom line on this is the first task of the subcommittee will be to go through this list and do exactly what we said in our budget discussions. What are the A priority items? And justify them, okay? And get that list down to a point that we can work it effectively and get it done in time. We agreed on that? Jay, that's you, and
So that the
and
members
Jim.
of the planning commission know what's going on. Can we get a list of the ordinances, whether they're assigned to committee now or the ones that we're going to do?
There is a list, and it actually, the last time that list was at this commission was probably a year ago.
I have this book, and the last thing in here is about 2000.
Well, no, this was, I put a spreadsheet together.
All I'm saying is, I think we need to have...
Well, I'll tell you what, the output of that commission from the next go-around will be a recommendation for the A priority items, okay, for this full commission. So the subcommittee will come back to this commission and say, these are the things we think are the A priority items, this is what we propose to do or not do, if none of them are A items. Agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. All right, anything else, Brian?
Nope.
All right, that completes the list of items. The next meeting date. I would propose that we move out to March. If there's no other applications in the hopper right now, I would suggest perhaps March 19th, 2 months out. How does that look for everybody? That'll give us time to do a little bit of ordinance work.
March 19th.
Is that all right, Steve? Brian? Jay? Yeah, that's the third Monday in March. Everybody okay with that? Okay, just one last final comment. For anybody who might be watching out there in the audience, you see we have 7 members up here in our commission. Okay, dedicated people working hard for the community. Normally, we have 9 people. Okay, we have 2 spots which are currently unfilled because the people who who were in those positions for personal reasons had to move on to other things. Okay, I would ask that any of you who out there in the audience who have an interest in helping the community in the planning process and kind of participating in the things that like what you heard tonight, okay, and helping the community as a whole to move ahead, please submit an application. Okay, we would welcome it. Brian Loftus would welcome it. People coming on the Planning Commission are appointed by Mr. Loftus, okay, and I'm sure he would give due consideration to anyone out there who would like to contribute their time and skills and effort. So please consider that. We would be glad to have you here. Having more people here, I think from all of our perspectives, leads to a more comprehensive analysis, better discussion, and finally, ultimately, better decisions. So we want that. Okay, that completes that. So on that note, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion from Eric, support. Support from Brian. Call the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.